Today we are going to conduct employee training for facilities with hazardous materials and waste. This training must be provided annually for all employees that work at or oversee the operations of hazardous materials and waste in a facility. We will cover the following topics today: emergency response including emergency contacts, the site map, fire response, spill documentation, and identifying spill pathways. Hazardous materials and waste, safety data sheets, handling hazardous waste, storing hazardous waste, and documenting the disposal of hazardous waste. Emergency response. Bad things can happen at facilities that store and use hazardous materials. These include fires and spills. We will discuss proper protocols for emergency response. Your facility must have a list of emergency contacts including facility emergency coordinator contacts and the contact information for the fire department, local certified unified program agency or CUPA, the California Office of Emergency Services, and the nearest medical facility. The emergency contact list is usually posted on site or can be found in the compliance binder. Refer to your site for the exact location. The site map is an important document to be familiar with. It shows the following: the emergency meeting area, or the staging area, the location of hazardous waste and materials on site, the location of fire extinguishers, locations of emergency shutoffs, and the location of spill kits. The site map is usually posted on site or can be found in the Search tab in the compliance binder. Refer to your site for the exact location. In the event of an evacuation, you must proceed to the emergency meeting place, also known as the staging area, recognized with a star symbol in the map. If first responders are called, they will expect you to be there and to have conducted a head count. Refer to your site for the specific emergency meeting place. In the event of a fire, if applicable, use emergency shut-off to stop the flow of gasoline. For a small fire, use an extinguisher to put out the small fire. Locations of the fire extinguishers are shown on the site map. For a large fire, evacuate employees and all other persons to the staging area as per the site map. Call 911 and contact facility management. To operate a fire extinguisher, remember the word pass. Pull the pin, aim the nozzle at the base of the fire, squeeze the handle, and sweep the nozzle from side to side. Remember, fire extinguishers should only be used on small fires or to suppress a fire to allow a person to escape. Large fires should be handled by the fire department. We will now move on to spill control and response. In the event of a spill, call 911 if the spill is serious. Restrict access to the spill area with barricades and caution tape if required. If safe to do so, prevent spills from entering storm drains or from leaving the property. Once again, make sure you use appropriate PPEs. Dispose of used spill kit supplies as hazardous waste, never in the trash or dumpster. Document any response activity in the spill log. Contact the facility emergency coordinators as listed on the emergency contact list. Emergency shutoffs. Shutoff locations for gas, water, and electrical service can be found on the facility site map. The emergency shutoff locations vary by site. All significant spills must be recorded. A recordable release is any unauthorized release that requires the use of a spill kit to clean. These spills must be recorded in the spill log. In addition, a spill must be reported to your local CUPA if it is greater than 5 gallons. A 911 reportable spill is any spill greater than 5 gallons that significantly endangers life, health, property, or the environment. In the event of a spill such as this, you must call 911, the local CUPA, and the Office of Emergency Services. In the spill log, note the following: the date of the incident, the source of discharge, the approximate volume of the spill, the date of the response to the spill, the method of contact, and any agencies that were contacted. Agency contact numbers are included on the spill log. The spill log also has reporting contacts for spills. The spill log for your site should be in the compliance binder. Please check with your facility if you are unsure on the specific location. Material spilled within the property can enter the navigable waters via public storm water drainage systems. This can result in big fines and big cleanup costs. Fortunately, we already know where spills usually happen and the routes they will take. Spills start at locations where materials are transferred from one container to another, such as fuel dispensers and at tank fills. Spills also follow slopes and curbs. It is important to identify likely spill pathways before a spill happens. This will improve your ability to respond to a spill. We will now move on to proper handling, storage, and transport of hazardous materials and waste. This picture is a perfect example of how not to store your hazardous waste. Obvious mistakes include improper storage, non-labeling, and unacceptable drum conditions. We will talk about proper handling of hazardous waste in later slides. Your facility may utilize numerous hazardous materials as part of normal operations or for infrequent activities like maintenance and cleaning. These might include fuels, lubricants, processed feedstocks, material conditioners, solvents and cleaning agents, as well as compressed gases. Your employer must provide safety data sheets for all hazardous materials you may be exposed to while at work. SDS may be provided in printed or electronic formats. Check with your facility for the exact safety data sheet's location. The updated Hazard Communication Standard, revised in 2012, formerly known as Material Safety Data Sheets, are now known as Safety Data Sheets. The standard aligns with the UN's Global Harmonized System of Chemical Labeling, or GHS. The GHS requires one label to be placed on packaging and the other posted on the outside of containers so hazards can be identified. If the chemical is not properly labeled, contact the manufacturer directly to request an SDS with the new GHS format. Safety data sheets have been standardized to include the following information in the following order. Section 1. Identification. Section 2. Hazards identification. Section 3. Composition and information on the ingredients. Section 4. First aid measures including important symptoms or effects, whether acute or delayed, and the required treatment for exposures. Section 5. Firefighting measures. Section 6. Accidental release measures. Section 7. Handling and storage. And Section 8. Exposure controls and personal protection. Sections 1 through 8 describes general information about the product. The sections highlighted in red are the sections employees should read over when handling the product. Sections 9 through 10 covers technical and scientific information about the product, while sections 11 through 16 cover information enforced by non-OSHA agencies. Section 9 covers physical and chemical properties. Section 10, stability and reactivity. Section 11, toxicological information. Section 12, ecological information. Section 13, disposal considerations. Section 14, transport information. Section 15, regulatory information. And finally, Section 16 covers other information. To help workers locate important hazardous materials handling information, the new Hazardous Materials Communication Standards require labels on each container that provides the critical information from the safety data sheets. Below are the new standardized symbols categorized by hazard. Chemicals with the health hazard pictogram are chemicals that are considered to be a carcinogen, post-reproductive toxicity, respiratory sensitizer, and target organ toxicity. Chemicals with the exclamation mark symbol are chemicals that are considered to be an irritant to the skin, eye, and/or respiratory tract, have acute toxicity, hazardous to the ozone layer, and have narcotic effects. Corrosive chemicals can cause skin corrosions and burns, eye damage, and are able to cause corrosion to metals. Chemicals with the skull and crossbone pictogram are chemicals that through exposure to a single dose may be toxic or fatal if inhaled or swallowed, or if it comes into contact with the skin. Chemicals with the exploding bomb are chemicals that are explosive, self-reactive, and tend to be organic peroxides. Flammable chemicals are self-heating and are reactive. They also emit flammable gas. The pictogram with the dead fish include chemicals that pose threats to the environment and aquatic life. The gas cylinder symbol labels gases under pressure. The last pictogram shows the flame over a circle. These chemicals are oxidizers. Oxidizers may cause a fire by increasing the concentration of oxygen in the air. Hazardous chemical classes and phases. Chemicals can be toxic, reactive, ignitable, and corrosive. Chemicals forms include solids, liquids, and gases. Variations of these forms can be dust, mist, fumes, and vapors. Exposure to hazardous materials can cause two kinds of health effects. Chronic effects are an adverse effect on an animal or human body with symptoms that develop slowly due to long and continuous exposures to low concentrations of a hazardous substance. Such symptoms do not usually subside when the exposure stops. Acute effects are an adverse effect due to the exposure to a harmful substance on animals or humans, whereby severe symptoms develop rapidly and lead quickly to a health crisis. These symptoms often subside when the exposure stops. Chronic effects include cancer, birth defects, and damage to major organ systems. Acute effects include respiratory distress, skin and eye burning, irritation, permanent burns, blindness, GI irritation, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and inhalation of liquid, usually from aspiration of vomit. In order for a chemical to cause harm, it must be hazardous, present in sufficient quantities or concentrations, and have a route exposure. Hazardous materials cannot have an effect unless there is an exposure. All exposures have a route. They can be ingestion, inhalation, skin contact, eye contact, or injection. Exposure prevention. Prevent chemical exposure by knowing what chemical you are working with, using the smallest amount of the chemical to do the job, maintaining machinery equipment and containers to prevent leaks and releases, using adequate ventilation to reduce chemical concentrations in the air, keeping containers closed when not in use to prevent evaporation and releases, and wearing appropriate PPEs for the chemicals you are using. To prevent exposures, PPEs are worn to intercept hazardous materials and prevent exposure. Examples of PPEs include dust mask, full-face respirators, gloves, face shields, and safety glasses. Another important PPE is good housekeeping. Most hazardous materials exposures can be avoided if hazardous wastes are maintained in appropriate containers and only removed from the containers when needed. Never store hazardous materials in locations where food is kept. Never use a food or drink container to store hazardous materials, even temporarily. Finally, the best exposure prevention is to approach hazardous materials handling and storage thoughtfully. Think about the potential hazards posed by any hazardous materials you are using and think about how you can prevent exposure to yourself, your coworkers, and the environment. Ask yourself, what are you handling? What kind of hazards it presents? How you or coworkers could be exposed? How something could go wrong? And what you need to do to prevent an exposure. If an acute exposure does occur, the recommended first aid is usually to move a victim of an inhalation exposure to a well-ventilated area and provide oxygen as required, to wash the skin for 15 to 20 minutes for skin contact exposure with non-abrasive soap, to flush the eye for 15 to 20 minutes for eye contact, and for ingestion, never induce vomiting. Instead, seek medical attention. Hazardous waste. Hazardous wastes are a special category of hazardous materials. For something to be a hazardous waste, it must be a waste. Then, it must be considered hazardous. There are many classifications for hazardous waste that we will not get into for this training session. If you have additional questions about the classification of hazardous waste, contact a Rely Environmental Compliance Associate. Common hazardous wastes at facilities like this one include contaminated fuels, solvents or feedstock, used fuel filters, used oil, sump water, used antifreeze, used transmission fluid, used spill kit supplies, and clarifier and tank bottom sludges. Refer to your site for the specific hazardous waste storage location. All hazardous waste containers must be labeled with the following information: the start date, the words hazardous waste, information about the generator, information about what the waste is, if the waste is a solid, liquid, or a gas, and if it's toxic, reactive, ignitable, or corrosive, also known as TRIC. Note that the start date is the first date that any waste was put into the container. Hazardous waste must be stored appropriately. Storage standards include closed containers that are in good condition, flammable containers must be grounded, containers must be removed as required depending on generator category. You must inspect your hazardous waste storage area or areas weekly. Hazardous waste can only be removed from your facility by a licensed hazardous waste hauler. When hazardous waste are disposed of, manifests are used to track hazardous waste from cradle to grave. After the waste is cataloged, it is signed off for shipment by the generator. Any hauler that transports the waste must also sign for taking possession of the waste. Finally, the treatment site or disposal facility must sign off when it receives the waste for treatment or disposal. Hazardous waste generators are responsible for making an additional copy of the manifest and sending it to the Department of Toxic Substances Control at the following address: DTSC, Department of Toxic Substances Control, P.O. Box 400, Sacramento, California 95812. In addition, the generator should receive a copy of the hazardous waste manifest from the treatment site or disposal facility within 30 days of having the waste removed from the site. If you do not receive this copy, make sure you notify your Reliant Environmental Compliance Associate. We can assist you in obtaining a copy of the manifest or filing a manifest exception report with the Department of Toxic Substances Control. We hope you never need much of the information included in this training. But now you're prepared to handle emergencies at this facility because you now know the location of the emergency contact roster and site plan, what to do in the event of a spill or fire, the location of the spill kit, and how to safely handle and dispose of hazardous materials and waste. Thank you for participating in this important environmental health and safety training session. If you have any questions about this training, contact us at info@reliantenvironmental.com.